webinar. We have a moment where regional and international attention is sharply focused on the deepening tensions between Israel and Iran. Since Israel's unprovoked attack on Iran a few days ago, we've witnessed a dangerous escalation, marked by direct strikes between the two states that has further shattered long-standing patterns of shadow warfare and raised the specter of broader regional conflict. The potential for spillover into neighboring countries is very real. Despite various mediation efforts and calls to de-escalate, the escalation remains elusive. And this raises serious concerns about the resilience of regional security frameworks and whether existing diplomatic tools are sufficient to contain the crisis. How did we get here? And more importantly, how do we get out of here? Will the US join the conflict? Is there an off-ramp for the combating sides? These are some of the questions we would like to tackle today. And to tackle them, we have put together an excellent webinar and an excellent set of speakers for you. Today, we have Barbara Slavin, a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. We have Hamid Reza Azizi, non-resident fellow with the Middle East Council. And we have Mu'in Rabbani, senior non-resident fellow also with the Middle East Council. For this webinar, translation in Arabic is available. Please click on the globe in the Zoom below. The webinar is recorded and live streamed on YouTube as well. So Mu'in, I would like to start with you. What are Israel's calculations in launching this war, and what are the objectives? And have some of these objectives been achieved? Please tell us a bit more on the Israeli calculations. Floor is yours. You're on mute.
Yes. Thank you, Adel, and thank you to the Middle East Council for organizing this webinar at this crucial point in time. I believe that Israel believed that launching a war against Iran was necessary to prevent a successful conclusion of US-Iranian negotiations. Israel has consistently opposed negotiations with Iran in any way, shape, or form for decades. When an agreement was reached with Iran in 2015, Israel, in fact, moved heaven and earth to see this agreement repudiated, succeeding during the first Trump administration, as I'm sure you remember. So the war, I believe, was initially sold to Washington as a form of leverage to enable a deal, but in fact, the war was designed to make a deal impossible. Israel's objectives are multiple: to destroy Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile program, and to weaken Iran's military capabilities as far as possible. At the same time, it's clear that Israel has concluded its campaign can only succeed if it results in regime change and preferably a collapse of the Iranian state. In terms of the effectiveness, Israel has not succeeded in achieving these objectives, and given that it's an ongoing armed conflict, I should add, not yet. Israel assumed that its initial highly successful decapitation strike targeting the Iranian military and intelligence leadership would produce a level of confusion and disarray from which Iran would struggle mightily to recover. But Iran appears to have absorbed these very painful blows. An arguably more important Israeli objective is engineering a direct military confrontation between the United States and Iran, something which Israel believes will allow the previously mentioned objectives to be fully attained. On this score, Israel appears to be on the verge of total success. US involvement appears increasingly inevitable, though with the current president in the White House, one never knows what to take seriously and what to dismiss. Thus far, in my view, Israeli society, and more importantly, the Israeli political class, including the opposition, appears to have rallied fully behind its government. In contrast to growing criticism of the Gaza genocide within Israel in recent months, not because of the genocide, but because it is seen as driven by Netanyahu's personal agenda. The war against Iran is seen as Israel's war, not Netanyahu's. Iran is portrayed successfully by the Israeli leadership as the head of the octopus. There is widespread buy-in to this. Finally, regarding your question regarding Gaza, I think the subject and the discussion today demonstrates quite clearly that the war against Iran has pushed Gaza very far out of the news. But the genocide continues. If the US enters the war and the region erupts in flames, we could see dramatic developments, not only in Gaza, but also the West Bank, potentially even engulfing Palestinian citizens of Israel under cover of regional conflict. We have an extreme right government in Israel, which has openly stated its desire to be rid of all the Palestinians, in other words, outside the borders of mandatory Palestine. And it could see this as a unique opportunity to have that aspiration fulfilled. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Moin. Hamid, I'll move to you now. I want to get an Iranian perspective on how the Iranian government has responded. One objective was to shake, as Moin mentioned, the confidence in the Iranian system, potentially into some sort of regime change. So if you can just elaborate a bit on the Iranian perspective, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much to you and the council for organizing the event and for having me. Let's start with the Iranian government's response so far, the way I see it, which could be described as some mix of a tactical recovery and a strategic caution. As we saw in the first 24 to 36 hours, after the initial Israeli strikes, especially after the decapitation of key IRGC leaders, it really did seem like Israel had seized the upper hand. Tehran was shocked, of course, structurally shaken in the first few hours. We didn't see any response in terms of missile shot or whatever. There was a clear sense of confusion. But what we have seen since then is Iran recalibrating rather quickly. Its retaliatory strikes has been limited in number, of course, especially compared to what they did in October, etc. And I will explain why. But they have grown more sort of methodical over time, especially in terms of target choosing. So in that sense, Iran has shifted, it seems, from reactive targeting to what looks like more kind of deliberate, paced out strategy, hitting Israeli military and strategic infrastructure at some point in response to energy and economic infrastructure also doing the same, but without, or at least trying not to cross certain red lines, like directly targeting US assets, or in any case, trying not to provoke the United States to come in, regardless of the higher possibilities now, as Moin clearly mentioned. So now, why this kind of restraint or constraints? So it is not just about strategic decision or strategic discipline. It is a necessity. As far as we know, a number of major missile bases have been hit hard, especially in Western Iran. Not meaning that the missiles have been destroyed, but the access to the sites seems to have been kind of blocked at the moment. So operational capacity at the moment is constrained. But so this is one of the reasons. Also, Israeli control over the airspace, which means that any missile launchers that comes out is a target immediately. But at the same time, Iran is also hoping for the escalation. I mean, we've heard statements from Abbas Araghchi, for example, the Iranian foreign minister, saying that one phone call from Washington can stop this war. So Iran is clearly trying to leave some space open for back-channel diplomacy. Before this meeting, I saw some news about President Pezeshkian sending a letter to the Emir of Qatar. So these are kind of moves in that direction, I would say. On the domestic front, if we want to assess whether Israel has succeeded in shaking confidence in the regime. So that's kind of complicated, I would say. It is clear that targeting of civilian areas, increasing number of civilian casualties, especially in Tehran. So more than 200, yesterday it was reported that more than 200 civilians have been killed so far. So targeting of civilians, critical infrastructure being targeted in other cities. So it's as I had predicted in the first day of the war, it's applying basically Lebanon playbook word by word to Tehran. And one aim is to, as it is seen also on the Iranian side, to socialize the war and to create and spread fear and confusion. But if Israel's aim has been to provoke mass unrest or popular uprising, it hasn't happened yet, and in some ways it is backfiring actually. What we see in Iranian social media, for example, and also based on the contacts that I have constantly every hour with friends and colleagues in Iran, actually, the war might not just about, it is perceived as the war is not just about the Islamic Republic. Many now perceive it as an attack on Iran itself, on the Iranian nation state, and especially, growing reports and discussions like we had this Jerusalem Post report suggesting that Israel and the United States must aim at partitioning Iran. So these are quite sensitive issues, and the Iranian people are very patriotic in their view of the country, of course, any other country in the world. But in this case, the trauma of centuries of being invaded by different countries. The latest case was Iraq in the 80s. Is still there. So there's patriotic solidarity, I would say, but I wouldn't call it a rally around the flag in the standard sense of the word. It's more like we hate this regime, as we know for the majority of people, it's like that. But we are not letting outsiders take down our country. There are voices among the diaspora opposition, but it is barely reflected among the public in the country. So just quickly, on some of the other points. So I do believe that Israel's aims go beyond just missile and nuclear. The aim might be the best case scenario for them to initiate a rapid regime change or to lead Iran into a failed state where Israel can maintain operational freedom over Iranian airspace, and that's why it is seen increasingly as an existential war, not just by the elites, but also by the public. So I will stop there, and then we can discuss some other topics maybe in the Q&A.
Muted.
You are muted.
Saying good morning, Barbara, in Washington. And the question of the hour is, what will the U.S. administration do? Of course, President Trump has engaged in indirect talks with the Iranians, but this war has basically torpedoed all of that. There's been conflicting reports back and forth from the White House. And the latest one seems to indicate that the president is considering some military options. We've seen military assets, the aircraft carrier groups move to the region. So they are preparing some military options for the president. So maybe perhaps you can expand and maybe crystal ball. What can we expect the next 24 hours? I think is very critical, 24 to 48.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on with your other distinguished guests. Look, the decision rests with one person, and it rests with Donald Trump. And you're right. We have seen indications that the United States is now more amenable to joining this war, in particular in bombing Fordo. Only the United States has the B-52 bombers. that can carry the 30,000-pound bombs that could do significant damage to Fordo. As far as we know, that decision has not been made yet. And we've had a number of meetings of the National Security Council, one yesterday. I think there was one also the day before. The president cut short his attendance at a G7 summit in Canada in order to be there. And there is a push and pull, a kind of tug of war, certainly within the president's supporters. Many of them voted for him because he promised no more American intervention in foreign wars, especially in the Middle East. And so they are quite concerned. There's a lot of consternation among people like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, others that Trump will indeed drag the United States into another Middle East war. As far as I know, the B-52 bombers have not left their bases, which are in the American Middle West. And so that's what I'm waiting to see. If that happens, then yeah, for sure, the United States is getting involved on Israel's side. It's been very, I don't know if interesting is the right word, to watch the shift in Trump's approach. He was very much opposed to Israeli attacks on Iran at one point, and then we saw his attitude shift as a result of the reporting in this country on the initial success of the Israeli strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. I think Trump was quite dazzled by it and felt that he should be on what appeared to be the quote unquote winning side. But United States remains very vulnerable to Iranian retaliation. We have not seen Iran try to activate the militias in Iraq yet. As far as I know, the Houthis are still observing a ceasefire with the United States. But if the United States gets involved, I think we will see that change. And that's something that obviously has to be of concern to President Trump. There are also obviously concerns about the flow of oil, what would happen in the Persian Gulf, what that would do to oil prices and to the global economy as well as the US economy. So I think these things are still being weighed in Washington. As far as diplomatic options, one hopes, but we don't see it yet. The US proposal that was on the table before the war started demanded that Iran give up uranium enrichment domestically. And that has not been something Iran has been willing to do so far. I mean, it's possible that Iran would shift. But if you've seen the latest statement from Ayatollah Khamenei, it is very tough. It says that Iran will not surrender and will not give in to these demands. At the end of the Iran-Iraq War, Ayatollah Khomeini drank the poison, so-called. He accepted a ceasefire. But that was after 8 years of war and 250,000 Iranian dead. So 200 is a terrible figure. Of course, there are casualties in Israel as well. But is this enough to make Ayatollah Khamenei drink the poison? Hamid Reza would know better. I don't think so yet. So we are sitting on pins and needles here in Washington, waiting to see what President Trump decides, whether he will be persuaded to join this war or not. There are Christian evangelical supporters of the president who are pushing him. We saw a very strange tweet by our ambassador in Israel, Mike Huckabee, which said God had saved Trump and seen to his election exactly for this moment. But Trump, as I say, has a lot of pressure from the other side of his support saying, please do not join this war. So maybe I'll stop there and wait for further questions.
Great. Thanks, Barbara. Moin, going back to you, you mentioned that largely the Israeli public is behind the war or the attack at this stage. But this is I would say the first time in a long time that the war comes to major cities in Israel. And the current generation has known relative peace and prosperity. This is not 1967, it's not 1973. And one is watching images of supersonic missiles raining on Tel Aviv and people hiding in shelters. I've been reading some reports that hotlines, mental health hotlines, are very busy, and already there's been a mental health crisis since the October 7th with the rise in anxiety and depression, PTSD, and so on. So we've been in this for 5 days, but the Iran-Iraq war was 8 years. So Iran can be there for the long run. How do you see Israeli society reacting, especially also with the closure of the airport, disruption in economic life, and so on?
Well, my assumption is that Israeli society will respond to its cities being bombed the way any other society would. And this generally means that they will prioritize rallying around their military, whatever war is going on, rather than focusing on any opposition they may have to their government. And just as a side note, what I find particularly surprising is this constant refrain that Israel is creating the conditions for a popular uprising within Iran against the Islamic Republic. This idea that foreign aggression and wide-scale bombing is going to turn a population against its rulers, no matter how disaffected that population may be, and no matter how widely detested that leadership may be, really has no historical evidence. And for Israel, of all countries, to be making this argument, we need only go back to October 7th. As you may recall, on October 7th, the Israeli public had been demonstrating in increasingly large numbers for an entire year against the Netanyahu government on the grounds that it was seeking to subvert the Israeli judiciary and essentially turn it into an extension of the Israeli government. When the October 7th attack happened, we didn't see these demonstrations exploding in numbers and Netanyahu overthrown on October 8th. To the contrary, Israelis, including those who had been most bitterly critical of Netanyahu, immediately responded to their call-up orders, joined the reservists, got in their planes, and proceeded to perpetrate a genocide against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. And, all the historical evidence shows that foreign aggression is probably the least effective method to foment domestic dissent, particularly where, as in this case, we're not dealing with pinpoint attacks against a particular facility or a particular program, but a campaign which, as Hamid Reza said, is seen by most Iranians as an attack not on the Islamic Republican regime, but on the Iranian state itself. And so I see very little evidence that Israel's war against Iran is creating significant fissures in Israeli society. As I pointed out earlier, I see the Israeli public rallying around the government, in significant part also because successive Israeli governments going back to the 1990s have successfully sold Iran to that public as an existential threat, as the root of all evil, as the head of the snake, the head of the octopus, to the extent that Israel, when it sees Hamas, when it sees Hezbollah, and so on, we are told that all roads lead to Tehran, very much the way the Soviet Union was perceived as a party responsible for, all the ills in the West for many decades during the Cold War.
I see you nodding, Barbara. Perhaps maybe you can reflect as well on an Israeli perspective. I know you follow the politics there closely. It's been 5 days now, but how will the society, how will the people continue? Because there's been lots of talk about Netanyahu wanting this perpetual war for his own political survival. Can perpetual war just roll on and roll on?
Well, it can, as long as the United States continues to resupply Israel. It's this at some point, if this goes on, it's going to be a question of who has more missiles. Certainly, Israel has the fighter jets, which Iran does not. Never got from the Russians, despite many promises over the years. In fairness, we have to say that the Iranian regime is in many ways responsible because of its own propaganda. How many demonstrations have I attended in Iran where they're chanting, Margbar Israel, Margbar America, death to. And of course, we must remember President Ahmadinejad during the 2000s with his Holocaust denial. So the average Iranian, I don't think, seeks the destruction of the Israeli state, but the regime certainly has rhetorically and through its support for groups like Hamas and Hezbollah over the years. And perhaps Samid Reza can speak to this, but my sense from talking to people in Iran, we published a piece on the Middle East Perspectives site from one of our writers in Tehran, was that, yes, people are responding in a patriotic way now, but the reckoning will come because they blame their government for policies that have put them in this predicament to begin with. Why was Iran responsible for the confrontation against Israel when so many of Israel's Arab neighbors have made peace with Israel? This is a question that Iranians have been asking for years. At demonstrations, they chant, no to Hamas, no to Hezbollah, my life only for Iran. This is a chant that goes back more than a decade at protest demonstrations. So, I think there is plenty of blame to go around. And from the Israeli perspective, this was their best opportunity to do this because so many of Iran's partners have been weakened, particularly Hezbollah, and because they had a president like Trump in the White House who was so mercurial. And, Bibi Netanyahu failed to get permission from Obama, from George W. Bush, and even from Donald Trump first term. But they felt that they could manipulate him this time, and this is what we have seen. They have manipulated him into what is a very, very difficult decision now. It's interesting, even some Democrats who worked for prior administrations seem to want the United States to bomb Fordo in the sense that this would somehow resolve the issue once and for all. But a question I have is, would Iran be able to reconstitute some of its nuclear program? Where is the 900 pounds of uranium enriched to 60%? Has Iran moved that to undisclosed locations? Would Iran actually be able to rush for a bomb? Because that would be the ultimate retaliation for the Israeli and potentially the American strikes. And that's something I think we just, at this point, can't know.
That's a great point. Maybe to you, Hamid, then. Everybody's talking about Fordow as if it's going to be a walk in the park, but it's 90 meters underground. And for Iranian military planners, you'd assume that lots of the material has been moved already and so on. So Natanz has been affected. Some other sites have been affected. Will an attack on Fordow really derail or may it push the Iranian government to acquire a nuclear weapon, because that is the ultimate deterrence, as the North Korean leader has calculated and done?
It's a difficult question, actually, and this has been discussed from, both political and technical aspects for years, I would say, especially in the past few months as the possibility of an Israeli attack was already growing. So just one correction. I mean, Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, in one of his latest interviews, he said that Fordo is half a mile actually underground. So it's much deeper than what was previously perceived. So the extent to which the United States can destroy it, and many people say it will take more than one strike. So it will be subsequent strikes. And then we shouldn't forget that we are speaking about an active nuclear facility and the risk of radiation. So again, there are different estimates. The immediate impact would be, in an area to around 5 kilometers. I mean, around Fordo. But then, depending on the wind, also depending on the potential water pollution, so the stakes are quite high, and it's striking. People speak of striking Natanz as if, as you said, it's just walk in the park. I mean, not from a logistical and military aspect, but also from a humanitarian aspect. And so, that's about the technicalities of the attack. Then. Again, as far as I could follow, and Barbara could correct me if I'm wrong, IAEA inspectors are still there, but I think there's no inspection as such going on. And nobody knows what is going on actually there. About Natanz, they targeted underground facilities and destroyed it. And then due to electricity outage, it is said that the centrifuges, which were operating underground, are also out of service. But then since Iran started reducing its cooperation with the IAEA, we know that, and this is again something that was mentioned by Grossi, that the IAEA doesn't know where exactly they produce centrifuges. So there's high probability that they have enough material to replace what they have lost. And then again, of course, there's the question of where are the material, even if they have been successfully moving parts of that to other sites. That would mean that any attack, would be kind of meaningless. And I've heard this from other experts, and I also do believe that if Iran actually decides to go for the bomb, it's not going to be from these known facilities. The whole reason that Iran decided to sign the JCPOA, and this is something that we need to appreciate, the main reason that Iran decided to do this, to sign the JCPOA, to give the IAEA inspectors extra access and so on, additional protocol, they started implementing that for some time. It was because they did want to have this threshold capability as a kind of deterrent. I mean, many experts were already warning that this is not going to work. This would be an invitation to an attack. But at the same time, they knew the stakes. So it was a kind of, as I said, threshold capacity as deterrence, not the nuclear weapon itself. But in the past few years, there have been growing voices within Iran. And now in these past few days, I see kind of ordinary people also asking this, do we have the capacity to produce a weapon? Do we have the capacity to actually, rush for the bomb? I've seen debates, is it possible that we can get a bomb from North Korea, for example? But then another technical question comes that to what extent Iran has been able to work or has worked on other elements of a nuclear weapon, like delivery systems, like warhead, etc. We know that the research based on the facts that we have and the IAEA has, and also even based on the facts that Israel could get out of Iran a few years ago in a secret operation, that Iran did have a research plan, researching on weaponization, but that stopped in 2003. There's no indication that Iran has actively worked on those other elements. So in these circumstances, especially under fire, and reaching to 90% without having other elements, that would actually be pointless, and would give further justification that the Israeli claim of a preemptive strike was valid. So what I want to say is that there's a lot of different technical questions here that we simply don't have enough information to answer.
Great, thanks, Hamid. I want to just ask you, and I want to ask all our panel a follow-up question on escalation. Okay, so let's say President Trump decides to get involved, Fordow is bombed, Iran retaliates. There's been lots of speculation about activating PMF and other forces in Iraq, but also attacks on U.S. facilities in the Gulf. We are based here in Qatar. Iran is basically 250 kilometers away. There's a U.S. base here. There's a U.S. base in Bahrain, Kuwait. How do you see Iran escalating? And if bombed, would they target these facilities? Hamid, to you first.
So yeah, I mean, as I said, one of the reasons that at least following the discussions among Iranian experts and what is being said in Iran, one of the reasons they say is for this kind of rather more limited waves of missiles and using a smaller number of missiles in each wave of attacks is because they are getting prepared for a scenario of US involvement. And we know that for targeting US bases in the region, they don't even need to use the longer range hypersonic ones. They are just closer. They can use other missiles that they have in the arsenal. So that's a serious possibility. And again, as I said, because the stakes are so high for the Iranian government, I think if the United States gets involved, then all bets would be off. And among the range of possibilities, they speak about the potential for closing the Strait of Hormuz. I should say that there are voices within Iran kind of advocating against this because they say in the longer term it's more destructive to us than to others, and it would also alienate Asian consumers, especially China. So that might not be the first option, but I think one of the first steps that Iran would take would be to target US bases and US assets and personnel in Iraq. And that would come along with the activation of the militias, Iran-backed militias in that country. So far, as far as I could see, Katab Hezbollah, Asab Ahl al-Haq, so these more ideologically oriented groups of the PMF have declared readiness, have issued warning, basically. This is not something, I mean, obviously, this is also not something they want to get involved in, but I can say that for them, especially for the groups in Iraq, maybe not for the Houthis, maybe not politically for even Hezbollah, but for militias in Iraq, or those militia turned political parties in Iraq, it is as existential as it is for the Islamic Republic itself. So this is also something that we need to take into account when assessing the risks, because they have been not only relied on Iran militarily, but also politically, and also given all the sentiments in Iraq, in the region, and what happened in Syria, the growing Sunni activism, in Iraq, fragmentation within the Shia house and everything, and especially in the year of elections. So that would be quite significant to them. So Iraqis, and then almost certainly the Houthis. The Houthis have already conducted an attack together with Iran. But I think among them, when it comes to the American forces, the Iraqi militias would be more consequential because the Houthis have already been operating at full capacity somehow. They may and they will, I would say, break the ceasefire that they have with the United States. But then, if, for example, in a scenario, the United States, assesses that they can come in, bomb Fordo, push Iran towards surrender without any need for significant military engagement, and they actually move assets out of the region for some time, then it would be kind of technically difficult, especially for the Houthis. So there's a limit to the extent they can operate. But what I can say is that we shouldn't rule out any possibility in these circumstances. I see, again, growing voices confidently saying in Iran that it is already late. You should have already bombed some of the oil installations around the Gulf because that is the only asset that we have to dissuade Donald Trump from coming in, because we need to kind of bring the war to home for Donald Trump in terms of increasing oil prices and so on. So for the reasons that I mentioned, the hope for the escalation, and actually the pragmatic realization that this is not a war they can win. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's the irony that the Islamic Republic, of course, is very much ideologically oriented. And this is one of the reasons, as Barbara eloquently mentioned, that this has resulted in this disillusionment, public disillusionment. It is not suicidal. So it cares a lot about what comes next, and they need at the end of the day a country to govern, and so that's why I think they are still hoping for the escalation. But actually, if an actual attack happens, and then it becomes already, if they don't see an off ramp, then they would probably fight to the last missile, I would say.
Thanks, Hamid. Barbara, to you. Escalation. U.S. comes in. This is not going to be an easy campaign, and even if there's bombs dropped, the U.S. has no appetite for boots on the ground type of operation. So how would you see an escalatory scenario unfold in the next couple of days?
Yeah, I largely agree with Hamid Reza's analysis. I think the Iraqi militias, which have stayed very quiet, would be obliged. And now there aren't that many American forces left in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. has withdrawn, I believe, several hundred already from Syria. I don't know how many are left in Iraq. But they would naturally be the first that would be targeted. I think the militias might also go against U.S. Diplomatic facilities and softer targets as well. I know that non-essential personnel, so-called, have been evacuated from some of those areas, but there will still be the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, various other targets that could be hit. So if this becomes really a major war between the United States and Iran, I would expect these groups to be activated. One question I have is whether there is still any possibility for diplomacy, any kind of bridging agreement that might stop the war. Again, Trump's tweet that there has to be unconditional surrender makes that a little bit difficult. We haven't talked, and maybe some of your other guests can talk about what the Saudis, Qataris, Emiratis, others, Omanis are doing. Because, of course, they stand to lose a great deal if Iran does adopt a strategy similar to 2019 after Trump withdrew from the JCPOA in attacking oil installations, oil tankers, in the GCC states. Is that a possibility? Is that unlikely given the détente that has existed between Iran and Saudi Arabia for the last couple of years? It would hurt the United States and it would hurt American consumers, obviously, in terms of oil prices. So I'm curious whether folks think that that is a last-ditch possibility as well, and also what the Arabs are doing to try to end the war.
That's a great question. And actually, there was reports that the president of the UAE called the Iranian president himself. The Saudis have made some very strong statements. So, Mu'in, maybe I want to ask you to reflect on this, on the regional picture as well. Last couple of years, there's been this normalization train with Israel, Abraham Accords, and the likes. But for many countries in the Gulf, now Israel is perceived as the rogue state. Obviously, everybody fears Iran, the Iranian nuclear program, and so on. But in effect, Israel is the country that has brought the war from Gaza to the Gulf. So how do you see the Gulf leaders react, and what
Well,
could be the background?
yeah, it's a key question. I think it's important to recognize that there are fundamental differences between, at least regarding the position of these states, between the first Trump administration and the current one. If you'll recall, in 2017, there was a very close alignment of policies and perspectives between the United States, Israel, and the conservative Arab states about repudiating the Iran nuclear agreement, about weakening and isolating Iran, and about the aspiration for regime change in Tehran. And you'll remember these videos that came out of Saudi Arabia showing Saudi troops marching through the main streets of Tehran and so on. There's been a fundamental shift in the interim period for two reasons. First of all, through its attacks on the Aramco facilities in 2019, and then as a result also of the Houthi missile and drone attacks on Saudi and later Emirati territory. The Arab states and the conservative Arab states in the Gulf recognized, first of all, that they would be directly, excuse me for the background noise, but they recognized that they would be directly in the line of fire in the event of any armed confrontation between the United States and Iran. And second of all, that the United States and Israel lacked the capacity, the will, or both to insulate them from the repercussions of such a conflict. And what you've had during the what you've had in recent years is these states normalizing their relations with Tehran. In the case of Saudi Arabia, through Chinese mediation, and beginning to encourage the United States not to intensify the policy of maximum pressure, but rather to replace it with diplomacy. And I think we saw this very clearly during Trump's recent victory tour in the Gulf, where he was being actively encouraged by his hosts to continue with the negotiations with Iran and bring them to a successful conclusion. And given that under Trump, there's basically a for sale sign attached to US foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, and that these states are indisputably the highest bidder, it's somewhat surprising that Trump ultimately signed off on Israel's war against Iran instead of following the Council of the Arab States, who were encouraging his diplomacy with Iran. What will they do now? Well, now you have a real problem that Israel and its supporters in the United States, within the Trump administration, in Congress, in the media, and so on, are engaged in a hysterical, comprehensive campaign to promote direct US involvement and seeking to portray as any decision by Trump not to get involved, basically as the treasonous act of a coward. And Trump, of course, is a very prickly personality. So I fear that by not pulling strongly on the alarm bell and using decisively the influence that they have in Washington, that for Arab states seeking to avoid U.S. involvement, if such a decision has indeed been made, it may already be too late.
Thanks, Maureen. We have a lot of questions from our audience, so I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I want to ask my final question is the off-ramp, okay? Just 2 minutes. So from your perspective, so Hamid, Barbara called it the poison, drink the poison. How do you see Iranian leadership drinking, quote unquote, drinking the poison and finding some sort of settlement? What is the off-ramp?
So first of all, as I said, based on what we can see, official messaging, also semi-official kind of sources, Iran still is signaling openness to the escalation, but conditional openness. So when, Donald Trump's idea of unconditional surrender, for example, it's going to leave Iran with no face-saving off-ramp. So it's about which off-ramp we are speaking about, because it is actually clear that for Tehran, any exit from this war must not look like a capitulation, because the cost of appearing weak, especially under fire, would be externally high for the Islamic Republic, both externally and internally. So, for example, when we look at the enrichment, we can think of a scenario, for example, that Iran could go back to the negotiating table and agree to some of those ideas that were already on the table, like regional consortium for enrichment. But the problem is that, look, the whole negotiation that was ongoing and was disrupted as a result of Israeli invasion is now increasingly seen within Iran as a deception tactic by both Trump and Netanyahu. So there's a deep level of mistrust, even deeper than before. And the question that people, in the circles close to the regime are asking is that, okay, imagine a scenario in which we go to the negotiating table and we agree to, abandon the nuclear enrichment and so on. So what is going to happen next? Israel already has control over airspace. So is it going to be a scenario like Lebanon, that, every time they see something, something that they don't like, military movement or whatever. So that's the scenario of a failed state that I was speaking of. So it's not just about pressure. It's about, when you speak about, when you have only sticks and no carrots, then it means that the Islamic Republic also tries to stick to its stick, which is missiles. So the logic, I'm afraid, might be among the leadership that if it is going to be existential for us anyhow, so let's fight as long as we can, as much as we can, and then surrender. So that's what I mean in terms of which kind of off-ramp we are speaking about.
Thanks, Hamid. To you, Barbara, off-ramp, US. So the sticking point was the enrichment, and the two teams were still in discussion indirectly. Now the war has happened, but the Iranians have signaled that they want to find some sort of accommodation. There was a report that Trump may send his vice president to the region. What can the US do, and what can Trump sell domestically to not have this blow up in everybody's faces?
Well, I suppose at this point, the only thing I could see is that the Israelis continue their campaign for another week or so. I've seen reports that suggest that they think they can accomplish their objectives. In another week or so. The United States does not enter the war on Israel's side. And after another week or so, the US tells Israel, okay, stop. And some sort of process resumes. I agree completely with Hamid Reza that Iran is right to distrust any sort of process, but it will want to seek a respite, if possible, from these attacks to give it a chance to regroup. And then they can talk about, I mean, Iran could plausibly say it would stop enrichment for a period of time, since it has suffered so much damage to Natanz, its main enrichment site, and it would take a very long time, I think, to get that back up and running. So it could be portrayed as a pause to allow diplomacy for months or a year, and kind of take the wind out of the Israeli sails there. But that would require a level of strength and diplomatic finesse that we have not seen from Washington. A country whose president is putting crude threats out on social media. I mean, is he capable of that kind of nuanced thinking? Are others within the administration capable of convincing him? That would be the best case scenario. Otherwise, I think this goes on. And if the US joins, retaliation is certain, and it goes on a great deal longer than it otherwise would.
Thanks, Barbara. And finally, to you, Moeen. I saw a news story yesterday that showed Netanyahu for the last 30 years saying that Iran is this close to getting the bomb. They just kept it going for 30 years. So obviously, there's an obsession there with some sort of regime change, change Middle East, and so on. But let's say the US does not enter the conflict. How can Netanyahu sell whatever happened as a win for his constituency? And what's the off-ramp for Israel?
Well, let me start by apologizing again for the background noise. Look, this is ultimately an Israeli war to preserve its monopoly on the possession of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. I think we need to understand that clearly. And in my view, there is no off-ramp for Israel. Israel, seen from Israel's perspective, cannot afford to end this war without a decisive victory. A ceasefire without achieving its objectives will, in Israeli eyes, leave it weakened and diminish its powers of deterrence, and enable Iran to rebuild and perhaps even persuade Tehran to develop a nuclear weapon. Israel's objective is therefore being defined as regime change with increasing clarity. Israel, as I just said, believes it has no choice but to double down and succeed. And that explains the importance Israel is attaching to direct US participation in offensive operations within Iran. I think it's also important to recognize that in the wake of the October 2023 attacks, Israel essentially developed a new security doctrine. Rather than seeking to deter adversaries through its possession of overwhelming firepower, Israel will now use this overwhelming force to eliminate any real potential or emerging threat. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration in understanding why Israel attacked Iran. And in this sense, the Israeli campaign to eradicate the military capabilities of Syria last December and in the months since is a case in point of the operation of Israel's new security doctrine.
Thanks, Moeen. Let me go to some of the questions. Some people sent questions ahead of time. Some people are sending them on the Q&A. Now, one of the questions sent ahead of time would be directed to you, Hamid, that Russia and China are allies of Iran. Even Russia and Iran signed an agreement.
They are not.
You wrote an excellent paper about the Russia-Iran agreement. Where are the Russians and the Chinese in Iran's time of need?
This is something that I, for one, and many others have been saying for years, that there's no alliance as such between Iran and Russia, especially, and on that matter, Iran and China as well. Look, the thing is that there was this illusion of an axis of whatever in the West, and the same illusion in the Iranian leadership, especially strong core within the military security establishment, within the IRGC, that Russia especially is an ally. So by doing them a favor in the war in Ukraine, selling the drones, which effectively made Iran a party to that war, they hope that they would give something back in return. In this case, especially Su-35 fighter jets, which was supposed to be delivered, also more advanced missile systems. It's not that the Russians have done nothing, but it's been more limited to military technological cooperation and so on. Like on the hypersonics or so on, I think the Russian involvement is quite clear. But the thing is that when it comes to Russia, they have always had this approach of trying to have balanced relationships with different parties. And if you look at the pattern of their behavior, their approach toward the war in Gaza, and also in Lebanon, and even Syria, where they had clear geopolitical interests, it is clear that they want to work with all different parties, and that's one of the constraints. The second one, in terms of constraints, is that basically it's already 3 years of war they have in Ukraine, and it is still ongoing. So it has consumed much of their actual capabilities, even if they wanted to get involved. And on that matter, the war in Ukraine, actually, there are people among the Russian experts actually arguing that this is actually good for us, especially if it gets protracted, not in terms of a total regime collapse, but the weakening of the regime, a new war of attrition in the Middle East that would kind of refocus the international attention from Ukraine to the Middle East even stronger than before. So this is the kind of logic that we see, and we shouldn't forget that even in that strategic partnership treaty that they signed, it was clearly not about mutual defense. There was only one clause which obliged the parties not to allow third party to use their territory to attack the other one, which was quite obvious they wouldn't do anyway. So there was no commitment to begin with. There was no alliance to begin with. And the same goes to China. China has been, of course, a very important lifeline for Iran in terms of economic partnership, but there was not even a talk of military cooperation or something like that. So they are the maximum they are expected to do, and they are doing, is to call for de-escalation, expressing concern, and so on. And actually, again, back to Russia, one final point, they see actually an opportunity to increase their hand, to enhance their hand vis-a-vis the United States when they express readiness to mediate between Iran and the United States, between Iran and Israel, so they see a variety of opportunities and, of course, challenges. So it seems that the opportunities of the situation right now, overweighs the challenges that they perceive, which prevents them from acting in Iran's favor.
Thanks, Hamid. Barbara, we have a question for you. Are you there? And here we go. So a question from Jonathan, who's on the Zoom. Will Trump survive another failed American war? I think that's a good question. Speaking of the domestic context here, especially that Trump was elected on this platform of ending never-ending wars. The MAGA base is speaking of this. We spoke about the Tucker Carlson podcast and other voices in the MAGA movement Tulsi Gabbard, who's in the government, and others. So the US jumps in, and how does this play out domestically for Trump? Already the trade war hasn't been as successful as perceived. There's been some successes on immigration and the border, but still the presidency is not having the best start. This would also derail things a bit further, especially if it impacts the global economy and so on. So how do you see the domestic lens in the US unfold if this kicks off?
Yeah, well, we have elections coming up for Congress next year. And the polls are already indicating that the Democrats would take back the House of Representatives, which would be extremely important because you need the House to pass legislation to, get the budget through, to raise the debt ceiling, to keep the government functioning. And also the House has investigative powers and can begin investigating all kinds of aspects of Trump policies. The House could also impeach Donald Trump for the third time. Remember, he was twice impeached in his first term, and the Senate failed to convict. But the impeachment process itself is, of course, a major distraction. And there would be many articles of impeachment that one could imagine being brought having to do with both domestic and foreign policy. I mean, he's been doing many things in the US that are extremely controversial, like calling out the Marines to police the streets of Los Angeles so that his ICE agents can deport more immigrants. So basically he has this year, next year up until the elections, and then his entire agenda could face major obstacles. But he's still the commander in chief, and he still has enormous powers as president, and he has assumed for himself many additional powers that many people think are not constitutional. So in terms of foreign policy, there's really not much that the opposition in this country can do except try to influence him, try to show him that his legacy will be forever connected with the third Middle East war if he does get into this. And I think that may be one potent argument to use.
Thanks, Barbara. Maureen, you with us?
I am.
Very good. I have a question for you from anonymous attendee. Would the weakening of the Iranian regime, short of a complete collapse, be enough for Israel to present as a strategic victory, similar to how it framed its actions against Hezbollah in Yemen? So a weakening of Iran, degrading of capabilities, can Netanyahu then claim
If I could first just add a footnote to Barbara's response. On the face of it, I find no reason to disagree with anything she said, but I would also like to point out that Trump has successfully transformed the Republican Party into a personality cult, and that he is a consummate demagogue. Who could easily divert the attention of the public, and particularly of the MAGA crowd, to an entirely different issue. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that a Trump forever war in the Middle East will represent his undoing. I think the jury will need to be out on that. Regarding your question, I think only if Israel can present itself as having to capitulate to clear and unambiguous U.S. instructions to stop, because as virtually every expert who has looked into this has said, if Israel is the only party bombing Iran, it will not be able to do irreparable damage to Iran's nuclear program. Iran will be able to relatively quickly reconstitute that program. And if in response to this Israeli war against Iran, it actually takes the political decision to transform from a nuclear threshold state into a nuclear power. That would represent the ultimate failure. And it's for this reason that I answered your previous question by saying that there is no off-ramp for Israel. And Israel is absolutely committed to a decisive outcome, and that the only decisive outcome for Israel is regime change in Tehran.
Regime change. Okay. Hamid, so there's a question in Arabic from Haidar. Will a defeat of Iran lead to internal fighting? So I guess also today I saw a video that the son of the Shah posted from the US saying that the end is near and I'm ready to go back and be with my people type of scenario. I don't know if he's just being serious or but he seemed to be very serious. How, like, obviously there's a literature on how defeat in a war has an impact on domestic stability from across the world. So would the retreat or a defeat have an impact on the regime itself? I know you reflected on this. And the follow-up question is what happens? Because if it's not a popular uprising, is it the military stepping in to step aside the clerics? How would a scenario like that evolve?
Yeah, I mean, the guy has been on standby for more than 40 years now, and from time to time, when something happens in the country, he expresses readiness to come back. But what I can tell
He's
is
always ready.
that, yeah, of course, what I can tell is that I'm seeing a huge backlash after his statement. Especially, he had an interview with BBC, where he basically welcomed the Israeli invasion. So I can see, I mean, of course, I cannot speak for all Iranians. We are more than 92 million. But what I can tell is that I can see many people who are supporters of Pahlavi, and now they are strongly criticizing him for those comments, for the same reason that I mentioned, because there's a growing sense that and disillusionment about the fact that it is not even about the regime, but it can lead to the erosion of the state. And that brings us to the main question you mentioned about the possibility of internal fighting. On that, I think we need to speak in terms of scenarios. So there is no definite answer to that, because it, there's a variety of different factors involved. So one scenario, I mean, which seems that it was maybe the best case scenario that Israel wanted to achieve, would be to for the people to come to the streets and a massive uprising, the fall of the regime, and so on. So that has not happened, and as I said, a growing number of casualties, civilian casualties, are making people quite, I mean, pushing them toward the opposite direction, actually, against the idea of a foreign-led regime change, at least at the moment. But then there might be some medium to longer term scenarios, in the sense that, look, Israel is deliberately, again, I mentioned the Lebanon playbook. Well, we also can speak about Syria and Israel's campaign between wars there. So at least even, I mean, in Syria, actually, it was more limited to military targets under Assad. But now Israel is deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, and not only economic ones, but those which are related to civilian governance in the country. So it might be that the Israeli campaign ends in a matter of a couple of weeks, and then afterwards, given the inability of the country to provide services to the population, and we shouldn't forget that the country is already under sanctions, under the most intense sanctions, actually, in history. that would result in a longer term move toward the regime change. In the medium term, I mean, there could be, of course, some more pragmatic elements, and this is something, again, which was discussed already before this war. Some more pragmatic elements from the military establishment, not necessarily IRGC, armed forces in general, can come out, decide to give some, I don't know, some tactical or even strategic concessions, but take control of things, securitize domestic sphere in order to preserve territorial integrity, and then a kind of military authoritarian rule can happen. And then finally, another scenario, again, a kind of medium to longer term, would be a state of chaos, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Israel might have already done this or do it in the next phase to create some armed cells or arm the ethnic, for example, rebels and so on, to fight against the government and bring this state into a kind of civil war situation. So these are the main scenarios at the moment.
Thank you, Hamid. A lot of dark scenarios there in Iran and for the region. And I think the next 48 hours will be critical, and we'll see which way it goes. We would like to continue the conversation, but unfortunately, the time is up. I really want to thank our panelists for a very, very timely and engaging panel. Thank you very much for joining us. Today's webinar is a part of a series of activities that we're doing to cover the developments. So there'll be more webinars. A number of our Iran and regional experts have been writing on our research and blog posts. So please follow us on our website, and hope to see you soon for the next webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.